We are reading, of course, from this book of his, Kim Il Sung's With the Century. We are just starting chapter 3 today. In Jilin. He has just arrived in Jilin, and so a new chapter of his life begins here, back when he was still called Songju. And takes place between January 1927 and May 1930. This chapter has the parts Pursuit of Progressive Thoughts, Mentor Shang Yu, the Young Communist League of Korea, the expansion of the organization, the demonstration of unity, Ang Chang Ho delivers a political lecture, the merger of the three nationalist organizations, the path taken by Cha Kwang Soo, and lessons of Wang Min and Behind Bars. Part 1. The Pursuit of Progressive Thoughts. I remained at home for about a month to celebrate New Year's Day. Then, in mid-January, I left Fusang. When I arrived in Jilin, it was noon, and the streets were full of people. I thought it would be awkward to take out my pocketbook and turn over the pages with numb fingers to look up the addresses of my acquaintances each time I was going to ask my way. So I had committed to memory the names of the streets and house numbers I was looking for. From the first moment, the bustling scenes in the large city with its long history seemed to press down upon me, who had been living only in the quiet and lonely countryside. After leaving the station, I could hardly move because of my great excitement. I stood looking for a long time at this lively new scene, which represented a new life for me. The most memorable thing I saw in the streets of the city that day was that there were many water vendors. I heard some passers-by grumble that there was not enough drinking water, so that only the number of water vendors was increasing in a place once known as a city of water, even called a quay. And that life in the city of Jilin might well grow harder in time. The city life in which even a glass of water had to be reckoned with in terms of money weighed down heavily upon me from the first moment. But defying this weight, I threw out my chest and marched down the street into the city. Having walked some distance along Chelo Street, towards Beishan, from the station I came to a wall which separated the inner city from the outer part, and saw a gate in the wall with a sign reading Jiaoying Gate. Near the Jiaoying Gate there was another gate called Xinka Gate. Besides these two gates, there were Bohu, Linjiang, Fuzhou, Disheng, and Beiji gates, and others, 10 in all. All of these gates were guarded by soldiers of Zhang Shouxing's army. The ancient-looking wall of Jilin, marred here and there by weathering, showed that this was an old walled city. Although I was a stranger to this place, the city did not seem so unfamiliar to me. This was probably because I had long wished to see it, and there were many friends from my late father in the city. In my pocketbook, I had the addresses of more than 10 friends and acquaintances of my father, to whom I would have to pay courtesy calls. Old friends of my late father like Go Tung-jin, Jang Chol-ho, Sun Jong-do, Kim Sa-han, Hyun Mak-kwan, or Hun Il-chol, Ko Wan-am, Pak Il-bak, and Kwang Pak-ha were all living in Jilin. I had to call on all of them. O Tong-jing was the first person I decided to visit. I called at his house, which was located between Cholo Street and Xingfu Street. To tell the truth, I was feeling rather nervous at the time. I was afraid that Commander Ho might have been displeased to hear that I had left Hwasong Yusik School, to which I had been admitted through the kind offices of my father's friends. But he was as kind as ever, and delighted to see me. When I told him why I had left Hwasong Yusik School and come to Jilin, he sat nodding his head in silence for a while, looking serious. Then he said, quote, "Seeing you in Jilin all of a sudden, I'm reminded of your late father. Your father, too, unexpectedly left Sungsil Middle School. I heard that with many regrets at the time, but much later I realized that your father had been right in making the decision. Anyhow, I marvel at your resolve to leave the school after only 6 months and come to Jilin. If Jilin is what you want, then dig your well here." Unquote. This was all O Tung Jin said after hearing my account of how I had come to Jilin. I felt grateful to him for his broad minded way of thinking, which was fully worthy of him. He remarked that regret that now that I had decided to come to Jilin for schooling, I should have had my whole family, my mother and younger brothers, move there to settle. When he had come to my father's funeral, he asked my mother many times to move to Jilin, where there were many friends of her late husband. Mother was grateful for his kind suggestion, but she would not leave Fusang. With the grave of her husband in Yangdikin village, she thought, how could she move out to Jilin? That day, O Tong Jin introduced his secretary, Cho O-chun, to me. Since he had previously boasted a great deal about his secretary, I already knew something about this Ko Il-chun. He was well known in Jonggu-bu organization as a good writer. Our meeting that day marked the beginning of a special comradely ties between Cho Il-chun and me. That afternoon, O Tung-jin took me to Shangfin Hotel, presented me to some independence fighters. Among them were Kim Sa-hun and Kim Soo-woo, to whom Kim Soo-woo had written a letter of introduction for me, and Jang Chol-ho, who commanded Jongwoo-bu Guards. Besides these two men, there were many independence fighters, staying at the hotel whose names I did not know. Along with Tamfengi Rice Mill, this hotel was one of two nests for independence fighters in Jilin that they used for lodgings and liaison. This hotel also provided accommodation for many immigrants from Korea. The manager was from the same province as Reverend Song Jung-do. He had lived in Jangsan County, South Pyongyang Province, before moving to Jilin on the advice of Reverend Song and opening the hotel. Though it was a hotel in name, it looked more like a dormitory or public hall. It was within only 100 meters of the Japanese consulate, so it was virtually on the threshold of a consulate, which might just as well have been called the headquarters of the Japanese detective services in the Jilin area. It seemed risky, therefore, for the followers of the anti-Japanese independence movement to visit this hotel day and night, with secret agents and policemen so close at hand. But they came there all saying, the darkest place is below the candlestick. Strangely enough, there was never any instance of a Korean patriot being walked off from the Changfin Hotel. So after we formed our organizations later, we often used this hotel. After reading the letter of introduction from Kim Soo-woo, Kim Sa-hun asked me if I would like to go to Yuin Middle School in Jilin, where a Korean by the name of Kim Kang, who was a good friend of his, was teaching. He said that it was a private school founded by newly emerging public circles in the city that it was the most progressive school in Jilin. It was widely known that this school was progressive by nature. The newspaper Xinhang Rebel had written about it many times. As early as 1921, the paper had said that it was a school in financial difficulties, but making a very good showing. So it was aided by various social organizations. Owing to the disputes over funds and the headmaster's abuse of his authority, there had been many headmasters. When I arrived, Li Guanghan had recently taken over, replacing Zhang Xinjian, a graduate of Jilin University in Nanjing. The fact that the headmaster had been changed 4 times sufficed to show how highly justice and lawfulness were esteemed at the school. This reformist tradition of the school captured my fancy. The next day, Kim Sahan introduced me to teacher Kim Kang of Yuan Middle School. Kim Kang was a good English scholar. He presented me to headmaster Li Guanghan. Li Guanghan was a left-wing nationalist from China, and he had been classmate of future Prime Minister Zhou Enlai. Let's fucking go. At secondary school. There we go, our very first Zhou Enlai mention, comrades. Early on, an early Zhou Enlai mention. It was several decades later that I came to learn of the relationship between Prime Minister Zhou and Li Guanghan. Once I had met Prime Minister Zhou Enlai when he was on a visit to our country and talked about my youth and those Chinese people who had helped me. I happened to mention the name Li Guanghan. The Prime Minister was delighted to hear his name and told me that they had been classmates at the middle school affiliated with Nankai University in Tianjin. Li Guanghan asked me what I was going to do after finishing school. When I answered without hesitation that I would like to devote myself to the cause of winning back my motherland, he said approvingly that my intention was highly praiseworthy. It seemed that because I had opened my heart to him, he readily granted my request that I join the second year without going through the first year. Later, when I was engaged in the youth and student movement and underground activities, I was given assistance on many occasions by Mr. Li. Even when he had learned that I missed classes frequently on account of my revolutionary work, he ignored the fact and shielded me so that the reactionary teachers bribed by the warlord authorities should not touch me. When the warlords or consulate police came to arrest me, he informed me of their attempt before I escaped out of the fence. Because of the headmaster was a conscientious intellectual, many people with progressive ideas were able to conduct their activities under his wing. When I returned after registering in Yuan Middle School, Mr. Otungjing and his wife told me that I should live with them instead of boarding at the hostel. But this was an offer for which I was truly grateful in view of my situation at the time. I needed the support of my mother to attend the school, but she was infirm. She worked day and night all year round, doing washing or needlework for money, and sent me about 3 yuan every month. After paying my school fees and the cost of notebooks and textbooks, I could scarcely afford to buy a pair of shoes. Such being my situation, I was obliged to accept the kindness and advice of the old friends of my late father. In Jilin, I lived with O Tung-jin at first. Then, after his arrest, I stayed with Jang Chul-ho for a whole year, with Yun Muk-kwan for several months, and then Ri-ung, who replaced O Tung-jin as leader of Zhongguan-bu. Most of the prominent figures in Jilin in those days had been on intimate terms with my father, so they cared for me and looked after me in many ways. While frequenting the houses of my father's old friends, I became acquainted with many cadres of the Independence Army and leaders of the independence movement, and met a large number of various people on their way in and out of Jilin. Almost all of the cadres of Jangwoo-bu organization were living in Jilin at the time. This organization had a splendid central and local setup, comprising administration, finance, judiciary, military affairs, education, foreign affairs, prosecution, and inspection and supervision, and it exercised as much power as that of an independent state, collecting taxes from the Korean inhabitants of the area under its control. In order to protect this huge machinery, it maintained a permanent central guard consisting of more than 150 soldiers. As a provincial capital in China, Jilin was, along with Vientiane, Mukden, Changchun, and Harbin, one of the political, economic, and cultural centers of Manchuria. The Jilin military control situation was headed by Jiang Zhusheng, a cousin of Jiang Zhou. He would not listen readily to what the Japanese said. When the Japanese told him that someone was a communist and another a bad man, he would reject it, telling them that it was none of their business. He did so more from his ignorance and self conceit than from any political conviction. This characteristic of the man was of benefit to revolutionaries and people engaged in the social movement. The greater part of the Korean residents in Manchuria lived in Jilin province. So Jilin was the haunt of many Korean independence fighters and communists who were fleeing from the Japanese army and police. This made the city a theater and center of political activities for Koreans. The Japanese had good reason for stating, quote, Jilin is the operational base for anti-Japanese activities in the three eastern provinces, unquote. In the latter half of the 1920s, Jilin was an assembly point for the leaders of Jangwon-bu, Chamu-bu, Sinmun-bu, organizations which constituted the main forces of the Korean nationalist movement in Manchuria. Hudian, Xinjiang, and Longjing were the principal centers, where the supporters of the independence movement published newspapers and opened schools. But it was Jilin where the leaders assembled and conducted their activities. It was also Jilin where the factionalists belonging to the Marxist-Leninist group, the Tuesday group, and the Seoul Shanghai group made reckless efforts to expand their respective forces. Nearly all the major figures of the communist movement conceded enough to think themselves important haunted in this city. All sorts of people flocked here: nationalists, communists, factionalists, political refugees, and so on. Young people and students seeking eagerly for new things and for the truth came to the city. In short, it could be said that Jilin was a scene where ideological trends of every description were breathing together. It was here that I unfolded my revolutionary activities under the banner of communism. When I came to Jilin, I found that some members of the Down with Imperialism Union had come to the city as they had promised in Hudian, and were on the register of such a school as Wangyun Middle School, or were working at the locomotive depot and the wharf. As soon as they heard of my arrival in Jilin, they hurried to the house of Commander O Tung-jin. Quote, money, drinking water, and firewood are scarce here, but this is a good place because there are plenty of books, unquote. They said in telling me of their impression of Jilin. I jokingly said that I could stand even the pain of hunger if I had many books. I said it for fun, but at the same time, I meant what I said. They had a favorable opinion of Yuan Middle School. Some of the teachers were right-wingers from Kuomintang, but most of them were affiliated with the Communist Party, or followed the three principles of the people, they said. Their words eased my mind. As it became known later, both teacher Sang Yu and teacher Ma Dun of the school were communists. We resolved to learn the revolutionary truth. We wished and fight for all we were worth to attain the goal of the Down with Imperialism Union in this new place. Those members of the Down with Imperialism Union who had remained in Hudian had left for the areas of Manchuria inhabited by Koreans, such as Fusang, Panchi, Xinjiang, Liu, Antu, Changchun, and Yitang counties, in search of new theaters of activities. Some of them had returned to their old Independence Army companies. In a confusing city like Jilin, it was not easy with only a small number of hardcore members to make all the people listen to what we had to say and struggle for the realization of the Down with Imperialism Union's ideals. But we were filled with a firm determination that each of us should become a spark to rouse 100 people and ensure that the 100 people in their turn would set the hearts of 10,000 people around them on fire to reform the world. I began my activities in Jilin by conducting a deeper study of Marxism-Leninism. When I was coming to Jilin, I had made up my mind to pursue in earnest and more profoundly the study of Marxism-Leninism, which I had begun in Hudian. The social and political atmosphere in Jilin stimulated my resolve to inquire deeply into the new ideas. I was more keen on reading the works of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin than studying the school subjects. In those days, China was going through a period of great revolution, and therefore many good books published in the Soviet Union and Japan were available in translation. A magazine with the title Translation Monthly was issued in Beijing, and it often carried progressive literary works, which young people and students found interesting. In Jilin, we could have any number of books which were difficult to obtain in Fusang or Hudian, but I had no money to buy them. People will find it hard to believe me when I say now that I put on my canvas shoes only when I was going to school, and I would walk about barefoot almost all the time after school. The admission fee for the library in Yimshingang Street was 10 fen a month. I bought an admission ticket every month and would stop at the library on my way home from school every day and spend hours reading books and newspapers. This enabled me to read various publications at little cost. When I could not afford to buy the good books on sale at the bookshops, I would persuade some rich students to buy them, and would borrow them from the sons of the families, who bought the books, not for reading, but for the sake of displaying them in their bookcases. At Yuan Middle School, the administration of school affairs was democratic. The chief librarian was elected every 6 months at a general meeting of the students. The elected chief librarian was supposed to draw up plans of management for the library, and had the right to acquire books. I was elected chief librarian twice at the school. Availing myself of the opportunities, I laid in a large stock of Marxist-Leninist books. But with plenty of books available, the trouble was that I did not have enough time to read them all. I tried hard to find a minute for reading and to read even one more book within the given time to understand its substance in full. Felt that hard. In my childhood, my father would give me books to read and make me put down in writing the gist of the books and the lesson that I have learned from them. This habit of mine, cultivated by my father, proved of great value. If you read a book carefully without losing sight of its essential point, you can seize its substance clearly, no matter how complicated it may be, and you can read many books in a short time. Is the fishing broken again? I want. It responded to me. That's weird. Huh. Very strange. Okay, it was right here. It was not simply out of academic interest. or from a spirit of inquiry that I spent night after night reading in my secondary school days. I did not delve into the books with the object of becoming a scholar, or for the purposes of a career. How could we expel the Japanese imperialists and win back our country? How could we do away with social inequality and make the working people prosperous? These were the questions, the answers to which I wanted to discover in the books. No matter what book I was reading and where, I was always seeking the answers to these questions. I am sure it was in the course of this that my position on establishing of approaching Marxism-Leninism not as a dogma, but as a practical weapon, and of searching for the truth not in abstract theory, but always in the practice of the Korean Revolution. In those days, I read the Communist Manifesto, Capital, The State and Revolution, Wage Labor and Capital, and other Marxist-Leninist classics, and books expounding on them which I came across. In addition to political books, I read many works of revolutionary literature. I found the works of Gorky and Lu Xun most interesting. When I was in Fusong and Baodagao, I used to read many old tales, such as the tale of Chan Huang, the tale of Sim Chung, the tale of Ri Sun Sin, and Monkey. But after coming to Jilin, I read many revolutionary novels and stories, progressive books, which described the real life of the time, including Mother, The Iron Flood, Blessing, An Authorized Life of A.Q., and On the River Amnak, A Boy Wanderer. Later, when we ran up against severe trials, like the arduous march during the anti-Japanese armed struggle, I recalled the revolutionary stories, such as the Iron Flood. I'd read them when I was in Jilin, and drew strength and courage from them. Literary works played a great role in the formation of the worldview of people, so every time I meet writers, I tell them to produce many revolutionary stories and novels. Our writers are now writing many revolutionary masterpieces. We became politically aware, also through seeing at first hand the absurd social phenomena and the miserable living conditions of the people at the time. Many of the Koreans coming from Korea to Manchuria passed through Jilin on their way to other places. We often heard from them about the pitiful conditions of the people at home. Some of the travelers crossing the river Amnak would pass through Dandong and come to Changchun on the South Manchurian Railway, from where they would either proceed to North Manchuria or Dongxi Railway, or go by Jicheng Line to Jilin, and then into the backlands nearby. Others would pass through Fangtian and through Duanha, Imu, or Ninggen regions, by Fringha and Jilin Oreo lines. In the cold winter and early spring, many Koreans could be seen at Jilin Station and at the hotels in the city. Among them were people with truly sad and pathetic stories. One day, I went to the theater with my friend to see a Chinese opera. After the performance, the actress who had recited the poem came to us and asked us if a man with the name Cho So and so was living in the city. He was her fiance. We were all surprised to hear her speak Korean. In Korea, Chinese opera was not known. The actress, whose name was Ok Bun, hailed from Gwangsang in Korea. Her father had one day been drinking with his friend, who lived behind his house, and the two men had promised that if their wives gave birth to a boy and a girl, they would match them as man and wife, and that if the babies were only boys or only girls, they would make them sworn brothers or sisters. After a while, a boy and a girl were born to the two houses. Their parents got a silk kerchief and into two and kept one half in each token of the in token of the marriage of their children. Later, the two families had to leave their home village in search of a living. The boy's family went to live in Jilin. The boy grew up and was now a student in Wangguang Middle School. After coming to Jilin, his parents had managed somehow to obtain a house and made a reasonable living by running a small rice mill. On the other hand, the girl's family had found themselves with no money when they arrived in Dangdong and were compelled to sell their little daughter to a Chinese family. Ok Pun had been trained with a whip in Chinese opera and become an actress. As she grew older, she began to think of the boy she had been betrothed to back in her home village. Whenever she came to a new place, she would secretly meet any Koreans there and ask them if they knew where her betrothed was. That day, the actress Ok Bun had a dramatic reunion with her intended husband from Wenguang Middle School. When Ok Pun said that he would stop her part in the play and join her husband, the owner of the theater company, who had been traveling with her, demanded a huge sum of money. So Ok Pun said to her fiance that she would return to Jilin after paying off the sum within a few years with money she had saved from her pay. Witnessing all this, we felt indignant and angry in our hearts. We students denounced the mercenary and the heartless manager of the theater company as a viper like woman. Life in a large city where hundreds of thousands of humans were locked desperately in a struggle for existence gave off the stink of a class society. One summer day, when the sun was beating down, I was returning from Beishan with my friends. On our way, we witnessed a roadside scene in which a rickshaw driver was bickering with a rich man. It appeared that the rich man, who had ridden the rickshaw, had not paid enough, insisting that, since the three principles of the people were in force, the gentry should duly pay heed to the matter of the people's livelihood. The rickshaw driver asked for a little more money, but the rich man, far from giving him more money, countered the three principles of the people with the five-rate constitution and hit the poor man with his cane. Scandalized at this scene, we students swooped down on the rich fellow and made him pay some more money. Such experiences made us skeptical and disaffected. We asked ourselves how it was that there were people who rode in a rickshaw, while there were others who had to pull it. And why it was certain people were living in luxury in palatial mansions while others were wandering the street begging. A man can be said to have established his revolutionary worldview when he becomes aware of his class positions and interests, hates the exploiting class, and is prepared to safeguard the interest of his class, and then embarks on the path of revolution with the determination to build a new society. I began to realize my class position through reading the Marxist-Leninist classics and other revolutionary books, became aware of many inequalities by observing social phenomena, conceived a growing hatred for the exploiter class and explorer society, and in the end, embarked on the road of struggle with a resolve to reform and rebuild the world. The more I read the works of Marx and Lenin, and the deeper I became absorbed in them, the greater the urge I felt to disseminate their revolutionary theories among the young people and the students as soon as possible. The first student I made friends with at Yuwin Middle School was a Korean named Kwon Tae Suk. There were 4 Korean students in all at the school. Kwon Tae Suk and I were the only ones who were interested in the young communist movement. The other 2 had no interest in the political movement. They were only concerned about money and were thinking of going into business after graduation. Kwon Tae Suk and I shared similar aspirations and similar views on society, and so we were friends from the first. Of the Chinese students, a young man called Zhang Xinmin was a friend of mine. He would always be in my company and discuss politics with me a great deal. We talked about various topics ranging from social inequality to the reactionary character of imperialism, the Japanese imperialist scheme to invade Manchuria, and the Kuomintang's traitorous acts. Marxism Leninism was still no more than an object of admiration among the young people and students of Jilin. Because Marx was said to be a prodigy, they would at most leaf through his classics just to see what sort of man he was. Or they would think they were behind the times if they didn't know what Marxism was. Drawing on my experience in Hudian, I organized a secret reading circle at the UN Middle School with several like minded students. Its mission and aim was to arm the progressive young people and students closely with Marxist Leninist thoughts and theory. This organization quickly grew and had soon expanded to many schools in the city, including Wenguang Middle Schools number 1 and 5, the Girls' Middle School, and the Normal School. With the increase in the number of members of the reading circle, we got a room at the rice mill by supporters of the independence movement and opened a library there, with the members of the Rugil Association of Korean Students running it. Today, libraries can be found everywhere, and if we choose to, we can build large palatial libraries like the Grand People's Study House. But it was not an easy task furnishing a library in those days, when we had nothing more than our bare hands. We needed to lay in a stock of books, set up bookshelves, and install desks and chairs. But we had no money. Every Sunday, therefore, we worked to earn money, carrying sleepers on our shoulders at the railway construction site, or gravel on our backs at the riverside. The girl students went and sorted rice at the rice mills. We purchased books with the money we earned penny by penny, with so much pain. We installed a secret bookshelf to keep revolutionary books. After we had finished equipping the library, we put up notices with brief yet interesting book reviews throughout the city. Excuse me. Excuse me, chat. Then a great many students hastened to call at our library. We even had love stories prepared to attract students. Young people often came to the library to read the love stories. After we had thus given them a taste of reading, we started offering them books on social science. When the students were awakened gradually through reading social science literature, we offered them the Marxist-Leninist classics and revolutionary stories and novels from our secret stock. We provided the young people and students with novels by Ri Kwang-soo, such as Resurrection, Heartlessness, and Trailblazer. Ri Kwang-soo drafted the February 8th Declaration of Independence in Tokyo, on the eve of the March 1st Popular Uprising, and wrote many progressive works while he was involved in the independence movement. Therefore, young people read his novels with keen interest. But later he deserted his principles and failed to write works with any instructive value. In the end, he went so far as to write reactionary novels like The Wife of a Revolutionary. After founding the anti-Japanese guerrilla army, I made for South Manchuria with the guerrilla force. On my way, I stopped in Fusang for a brief visit. And there, I read the novel. Its story is about a communist lying to his sick bed, whose wife forms a liaison with the medical college student, who comes to her home to treat her husband. Thus, the work was about her scandalous life. It was an insult to the communists, and defiled the communist movement from start to finish. Of a Saturday or a Sunday, we gathered at Jilin Church or Bishin Park to discuss our impressions of the books we had read. At first, there were some who talked about the love stories, but they were snubbed by the other students who said that their observations were quite worthless. Once humiliated in this way, the students who had become infatuated with love stories would turn to the revolutionary stories on their own accord. Storytelling was another method we used in widely propagating the revolutionary thought among the young people and students and the masses. One day, I had a sore throat, and because a poultice had been accepted, I could not attend a class. On my way home from school, I dropped in at Beishan, where I saw a large crowd of people sitting around a blind man who was telling an old tale. As I approached, I found the blind man was reciting a passage from the Three Warring Kingdoms, in a manner of the shaman narrating a spiritual message. When he came to the scene in which Zhu Liang takes an enemy position through trickery, he even beat a drum to add to the fun. Then, when the narration reached its climax in an interesting scene, he abruptly stopped, held out his hands to the listeners for money. In those days, this was called storytelling by the Chinese, and it was a good way of drawing the masses. After that, we had adopted this method in popularizing revolutionary thoughts. Among our companions was a man who was a real jester and quick of tongue. He'd been given the assignment of working with men of religion, and he was more clever and accurate than the pastors in offering up prayer and reciting from the Bible. I told him to take up storytelling, and found him to be better at this than at reciting from the Bible. He would go to a guest room in the village or a park where people flocked and narrate good stories in an interesting manner. He enjoyed great popularity. The blind man did his storytelling for money, but our friend did not ask for a penny. Instead, he would stop his narration at an interesting point and make an inflammatory speech for a while before telling his audience to come to a certain hour the next day when he would resume the story. So the next day, the people would come to the appointed place and listen to the rest of the story. Yo, the revolutionary cliffhanger, chat. Of the people I got to know through books in those days, Paxo Sim impressed me deeply. In the busy quarters of Jilin, there was a large bookshop by the name of Xinwensu Chu. I would go to the shop several times a week. Paxo Sim was also a regular customer there. He would always linger before the social science counter to find out which books had arrived. We often bumped into each other. He was tall and thin, and he had an intelligent air. When I went to the shop with some other students and bought armloads of books from the library, he would be as pleased as if he were choosing the books for himself, and tell us about the content of certain books, and advise us as to which books we should read and therefore buy. This was how I came to form a close relationship with Paxo Sim through books. When I was going to school in Dongdatan, he came to my quarters and stayed with me for a while. He had lived in Seoul before going there. He was in such poor health that he gave no thought to joining the communist movement, but wrote short articles for newspapers and magazines. His articles were carried in the newspaper Heijo Sinman and the magazine Jason Ji Guang. Although he had nothing to do with the communist movement, he was contemptuous of the factionalists. As he was upright and had great insights, those involved in various movements who frequented Jilin tried to win him over to their camps. He would sit up until late reading The Capital in Japanese. He was an enthusiastic reader. When he ran out of money, he would pawn his clothes to buy books. He was not a pedant who would pretend to be a Marxist-Leninist theoretician after reading a few primers. Yet, he was someone with a thorough knowledge of the major works of Marx and Lenin. He was a memorable teacher who initiated me into the Capital and explained it to me. as was the case with Marx's works in general. The Capital had many great points that were difficult to understand. So, Paxo Sim gave me explanatory lectures on the Capital. To grasp the substance of the classics, one needs a primer or a guide. Paxo Sim acted as a faithful guide for me. He was extremely well read. Once I asked him about the Marxist-Leninist propositions on the dictatorship of the proletariat. He explained to me that the propositions of the Marxist-Leninist classics, which interpreted the proletarian dictatorship from different angles at different stages of historical development. For his theoretical attainments and learning, he would be called a master of Marxism. But there was something that was beyond the reach of his knowledge, something he found it hard to answer. I asked him the question. Although the Marxist-Leninist classics say that the class emancipation of the working class comes before national liberation, is it not true that in our country, the yoke of Japanese imperialism should be thrown off first, before the class emancipation of the workers and the peasants? This question was argued about a great deal among our comrades. We found that the Marxist-Leninist classics fell short of providing a theoretical explanation of the interrelation between the emancipation of the working class and national liberation. As for the national liberation struggle in colonial countries, there were many problems which required scientific elucidation. Paxo Sim answered my questions only vaguely. I asked him another question. The Marxist-Leninist classics generally say that the revolution in the suzerain states and that in a colonial country are organically linked with each other and stress the importance of the victory of the revolution in the suzerain state. That means that our country will be unable to attain its independence only after the working class of Japan have won their revolution, doesn't it? So, should we wait until they win victory? Paxo Sim was at a loss what to say in reply to this. He gazed at me in surprise. He said it was an internationally accepted line of the international communist movement that, as was pointed out in the classics, the emancipation of the working class came before national liberation, and that the struggle of the working class in the suzerain states was considered more important than national liberation struggle in a colonial country. When I tilted my head in doubt, he became annoyed and said frankly that he had only studied Marxism-Leninism as a science, and that he had not viewed it in light of the concrete revolutionary practice related to independence of Korea and the building of communism in Korea. His words somehow saddened me. It was useless to study communist theory only as a science detached from practice, as he said it did. The greatest anguish my friends and I felt in studying the progressive thoughts of Marxism-Leninism was that while we were anxious to reform society by means of a revolution, as the Russians had done to liberate our country, and thus liberate our country, the situation in Korea was different from the situation prevailing in Russia. When the October Revolution had taken place, we were confronted with such complex problems as to how to carry out a proletarian revolution in a colonial country like Korea, a backward semi-feudal state, how to establish contact with revolutions in neighboring countries, particularly China, when we had to wage the struggle on Chinese territory, away from our homeland, due to the harsh repression of Japanese imperialism, and how to fulfill our national duty to the Korean Revolution and our international obligations to the world revolution. It took us a long time and cost us dear before we found the correct answers to these questions. Paxo Sim became intimate with me and was drawn deeply into my revolutionary aspiration in the days of my pursuit of Marxist-Leninist studies. He joined the Anti-Imperialist Youth League and then the Young Communist League and worked selflessly with us to educate and enlighten the young people and children. Although he had been a bookworm, he displayed an amazing passion for work once he had made up his mind and jumped into the arena of practical activity. We sent him to the Kalun area to receive treatment for his tuberculosis. He built a hut on the banks of the river Wukai, some 2 kilometers from Jiangtuan, and he lived a lonely life there, cooking for himself. Once, when I was working in the area of Kalun and Wujisai, I once took time to pay him a visit. He was delighted to see me. We had a hearty talk and discussed many things. He showed me a picture of his wife. I was surprised because I thought his wife was dead or they were divorced. The picture, her picture showed her to be beautiful, intelligent, modern woman. Pack told me that a letter had come from his wife in Seoul a short time before. When I asked him why he did not summon her, he explained that she was a daughter of a rich family. I asked him if he had not known that when he married her. Pack heaved a heavy sigh and said that after their marriage, his worldview had undergone a change. His words struck me as very odd. So I asked him if he had forgotten her. He had thought so, he admitted frankly. But after receiving a letter from her, he thought of her often. So I told him that if he loved her, he should write and send for her. How can a man who is incapable of re educating his wife overthrow the old society and build the new one? If his wife were by his side, it would also prove good for the treatment of his illness. I advised him. Pack sighed, and he said that he would do as I advised. Quote, I'll do so because it's your advice, but my life is already on the decline. I lead a frustrated life, I mean. He had no children and no estate or a mental legacy to be left behind should he have any. He wanted to devote his whole life to the study of Marxism-Leninism and write books which could help the working class. But he said he could not attain his objective. He said that when he had been fit and strong, he could not write because he was ignorant, and that now that he was now that he was awakened due to the truth, his health would not allow him to write. His remark grieved me. He was a devoted scholar, tireless and inquiring. If he had not buried himself in books and plunged into practical activities a little earlier, he might have hit upon some valuable theories helpful to the revolutionary cause of the working class and made some practical achievements. A theory is born of practice, and its accuracy is verified through practice. The practice we are not allowed to lose sight of, even for a moment, consists of the independence of Korea and the welfare of her people. To our regret, Pak So Sim had no sooner awoken to this truth than he departed from our side. His wife came from Seoul and nursed her sick husband, and he kept writing short essays and occasional notes before dying at Kalun. The ancients said that if a man learns the way in the morning, he may die in the evening without regret. It was a pity that a man like Pak So Sim, who could have accomplished many useful things, should have died as soon as he awoke to the truth. I spent a little more than 3 years in Jilin. Jilin is a place dear to me, with vivid memories from one period of my life. In this city, I came to understand Marxism-Leninism as a scientific theory. And with the help of this theory, I came to a deeper realization of the practical truth for the independence of Korea and the people's well-being. My quick comprehension of the essence of the new ideology was due to my sorrow and indignation as a son of a stateless people. The intolerable misery and distress of our nation led me to early maturity. I accepted the fate of my suffering country and compatriots as my own. This brought me a great sense of duty to the nation. In the days I spent in Jilin, my worldview was established and strengthened, and it provided me with a lifelong ideological and moral foundation. My accumulation of knowledge and experience in Jilin enabled me to build the framework of an independent revolutionary thought in the future. Study is a basic process for the self culture of revolutionaries and represents an essential mental endeavor that must never be suspended, even for a single day, in laying the groundwork for achieving social process and reform. Proceeding from the lesson learned in the process of pursuing progressive ideologies in Jilin, I emphasize, even now, that study is the first duty of a revolutionary. And that is the very first part of Chapter 3, Kim Il sung's With the Century.